It was past midnight. He had returned to his office alone. But there was a child on the floor just 6 years old, scrubbing a stain with a sponge. Like she was trying to stay invisible just to exist. And in that moment, something cracked in the silence inside him. That night, right there, a life quietly changed direction. And if you heard echoes of your own childhood in that child's silence, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. David Keller wasn't expecting anyone to be in his office that night, let alone a 6-year-old girl, down on her knees, scrubbing the floor with a sponge. It was something his mind couldn't quite process. It was well past midnight. Most of the lights on the 31st floor had been turned off, and silence had settled into the glass hallways. But David's mind was still racing with work. Phone in one hand, lines of exhaustion etched into his face, he pushed open the heavy glass door to his office and froze. There was someone on the floor. A small, fragile-looking girl. In her hand, an old yellowed sponge. A loose braid fell over her shoulder, and an oversized blue jumpsuit hung off her tiny frame. Beside her sat a plastic yellow bucket. She was scrubbing at a stubborn stain with everything she had. David stopped, thinking maybe he had fallen asleep standing up. Or maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. But no, she was real. And when she looked up at him, something strange stirred inside him. Those eyes, so small, but so full of an old, heavy kind of tired. "What are you doing here?" David asked, his voice cracking with confusion. "Cleaning," she said softly. But her voice was steady. David's tone sharpened. "But you're a child. Why are you cleaning?" The girl paused like she'd heard that question too many times to care anymore. "I'm alone. There's no one to help me. My aunt says I have to help. If I work, she lets me stay." That's when the businessman in David went silent, and the human in him finally spoke. He called security immediately. The aunt was escorted out of the building. He didn't bother listening to her excuses. There was no excuse, no story that could make sense of a child scrubbing floors at midnight. "Should we take her to a shelter?" one of the guards asked. David shook his head slowly. "No, she's coming with me tonight." It was a decision David Keller never thought he'd make. It was risky, irrational, maybe even career-ending. But for once, he didn't care. Those tired eyes hadn't asked him for help. But for the first time in his life, David did something not because it made sense, but because it felt right. Emily sat in the back seat of David Keller's luxury car, quiet as a whisper. Her feet didn't touch the floor. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't cry. She just stared out the window, watching the raindrops turn city lights into soft blurs of color. Like she was drifting into some faraway place only she could see. David kept glancing at her. She was a stranger, yes. And yet, somehow, she reached a place inside him he didn't even know existed. A man like David, who prided himself on needing no one, on controlling everything, was suddenly off balance. This wasn't a decision he'd made. It felt more like something that had already been written. When he let her into the car, he hadn't chosen a path. He had simply started walking. When they arrived at the penthouse, the doorman didn't ask questions. His eyes silently said, "Who is she?" But his mouth stayed shut. Inside the elevator, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was cautious, as if both of them knew they were standing at the edge of something new, and neither had any idea what waited on the other side. David led her to the unused guest room. White walls, a plain bed, a small nightstand with a reading lamp. Not made for a child, but for someone passing through. "This will be your room for now," he said. "If you need anything, knock. I'm right across the hall." Emily nodded without a word. She stepped inside, sat quietly on the edge of the bed. No questions, no toys, no asking for water. Just one soft, genuine phrase. "Thank you." David stood there for a second, caught off guard. How could someone so small ask for so little, and yet carry so much? He closed the door, walked to the kitchen, and poured himself a glass of whiskey. Outside, the city lights glowed through the windows, but inside, he was lost in a storm of emotions. That child had needed someone, and maybe for the first time in years, so had he. The next morning, David woke early, as always. Coffee in hand, skimming emails. When he saw her, Emily stood quietly in the doorway of the living room, still wearing that blue jumpsuit. Hair a little messy, but her face clean. "Good morning," David said. "Good morning," she replied. "You hungry?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." And for the first time in years, David Keller stepped into his kitchen and cooked. He had chefs, of course, but not that morning. That morning, he made an omelet himself. For Emily, she sat silently on a stool, watching him. When the food was ready, she ate slowly, carefully. They didn't speak at the table, but the silence felt warm, comfortable. David watched her every move. The way she carried herself. The way she said nothing yet said everything. She didn't act like a child, because somewhere along the way, she had been forced to grow up far too soon. And seeing it hurt more than he expected. After breakfast, David called his lawyer. "I need you to look into emergency guardianship laws," he said. Because deep down, he already knew there was no way he was sending her back to that woman. This wasn't just about doing the right thing. It wasn't about guilt. It was about the heart. Emily spent the day quietly in her room, reading books. Lydia, the housekeeper, had found some children's books to leave with her. David checked in now and then, but Emily never caused trouble, never complained. She was just there, like a soft, steady presence that had learned how to disappear. But for the first time, someone saw her. That night, before leaving his office, David sat still for a long moment, trying to make sense of what he was feeling. Yes, this was responsibility, but it was also something else. It was a chance, not just for Emily, but for him. Because somehow, this little girl had started filling a space in his heart he didn't even know was empty. And a quiet truth passed through his mind. I'm not changing her life. She's changing mine. Back then, time felt different. David had started working from home for the first time in his career. During video calls, his eyes would often wander toward Emily's door. Sometimes, through the crack, he'd see her reading a book, quiet, focused, peaceful. No noise, no mess. But maybe that was the saddest part of all. Emily had learned how to take up no space just to survive. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, David found himself thinking about his past. He had once been as small as Emily. Cold beds, crowded rooms with hollow-eyed kids, caretakers who never really cared. No one had stepped up for him. And that child, the one he used to be, still lived somewhere deep inside. But now there was Emily. And this time, David wasn't going to walk away. That night, she came to his door. Soft knock. Shy but steady. David looked up. I brushed my teeth. Wash my hands too. Do you want to check? David smiled without thinking. No need. I trust you. Her eyes widened in surprise. Then slowly, she nodded and walked back to her room. As David watched her go, he realized something. Emily wasn't just a guest anymore. She was becoming part of the house. Part of home. The next day, David opened a cabinet he hadn't touched in years. Dusty boxes. Old files marked Michael, personal. He flipped through childhood records, foster care reports. Struggles with attachment. Emotionally withdrawn. Permanent family structure unlikely. Each sentence cut into him like an old wound reopening. And in that moment, David made a choice. He wouldn't let Emily become just another file in the system. He wasn't going anywhere. He was staying. For real. That afternoon, he took Emily to a children's store. She froze at the entrance, unsure, like the place wasn't meant for her. David crouched down and said gently, "Pick anything you want. Today, this place is yours." She said nothing at first. Then slowly, she reached for a book, a fairy tale collection. That was it. No toys, no clothes, just that one book. That night, David read it to her. And as he did, Emily leaned her head gently against his shoulder. A soft warmth spread across his chest. New, strange, but good. Maybe for the first time, someone actually needed him. And he wasn't going to lose that. The next morning, a small voice echoed from the kitchen. I had a dream. David turned to look. Was it bad? Emily nodded. I was back at my aunt's. No food until the stairs were clean. No gloves. My hands hurt. David knelt down to meet her eyes. Bad dreams can come back sometimes. But reality's different now. No one here will ever make you do something like that. Really? She whispered. Really? And in that moment, something changed. The trust between them became real. Emily was no longer alone. And David, he wasn't just protecting her. He was finally healing a part of his own childhood, too. That week, David mobilized his entire legal team to speed things up. Emergency guardianship filings, psychological evaluations, home inspections, appointments were scheduled within hours, not days. But no matter how fast he moved, the looming weight of the legal system crept in like a shadow. Emily's future was no longer just between them. It was now written on paperwork, bound by signatures, and decided in courtrooms. David hadn't told her anything yet, but children have a way of sensing what adults don't say. At dinner, without lifting her spoon, she looked straight at him. "Will you be here tomorrow?" she asked. David's chest tightened. "I will," he said. Emily nodded. "Me too." The next morning, right at 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. A woman from Family Services entered the apartment, expression cold, demeanor neutral. She carried a thick case file clutched tightly to her chest. Her name was Ms. Demir. She didn't smile. She asked to see Emily. David called her in. Emily walked in, quietly, clutching her stuffed fox. She sat without a word. The questions came fast and sharp. "Where did you live before? Did anyone ever hurt you? Do you feel safe now?" Emily answered everything honestly. Her voice was calm until one moment cracked it. "If I have to go back, I'll try to be small again, so nobody gets mad." That sentence hit David like a knife through ice. Ms. Demir wrote her notes silently and left without a word. The rest of the day, David couldn't focus on anything. He told his lawyer just one thing: do whatever it takes. Every document, every statement. I want it ready. Today, that evening, David realized he had to tell Emily the truth. He sat her down in the living room. His voice was gentle but steady. "Are they going to take me away?" she asked, looking straight at him. David shook his head. "I won't let that happen, no matter what." Her lips trembled, but she didn't cry. "Promise." David gave a promise he had never given before. "I promise. I'm not letting you go." That night, David stood by the window for a long time. He looked out over the glowing city, and for the first time in his life he was afraid. Not the fear of losing a deal, but the fear of losing a heart. A small one, but strong. The days that followed were a blur of legal motions and preparations. Then finally a court date was set, just 1 week away. But to David, each day felt like a year. He didn't tell Emily. He didn't want her watching the clock or guarding her hopes. As the week passed, Emily grew quieter. David noticed. After every meal, her eyes would search his face, looking for reassurance, for something solid to hold on to. One evening, while she was drawing, she asked quietly, "If I can't stay, will you still remember me?" David dropped the pen in his hand. He sat beside her and pulled her gently into his arms. "Emily, there's no version of my life without you in it. You're here. You're mine. Always." That night, David didn't go back to his office. Instead, he sat beside her bed, reading her a story. And as she drifted off to sleep, he whispered something only he could hear. "This isn't just a case. This is my heart. And I'm not leaving it behind in a courtroom." The day of the court hearing arrived under a gray sky. The weather seemed to mirror Emily's fate, uncertain, still, and carrying a silent storm. David wore a dark suit, perfectly tied tie, every step measured like always. But his heart had never felt this unsteady. Emily sat beside him in the back seat, wearing a soft green dress. Her small hand held tightly onto his. They didn't speak during the drive, but in the silence, 1,000 unspoken words passed between them. The courtroom was smaller than they'd expected. No reporters, no spectators, just a judge, a social worker, David's attorney, and Emily. This wasn't about public opinion. This was about something deeper. This was about love. The judge asked David questions about his income, home environment, education plans. David answered calmly, clearly. But then came the moment everything paused. "Emily," the judge said gently, "can you tell us in your own words where you would like to live?" The little girl looked down for a second. Then, quietly, she lifted her gaze to the judge, then to David. Her voice was a whisper, but it echoed through the room like a bell. "I want to stay with him. Because when I was alone, I didn't feel real. But when he talks to me, I feel like I exist. And I never want to feel unimportant again." That sentence shattered every wall inside David. His eyes welled up, but he didn't cry. He just held her hand tighter. The judge sat in silence for a moment, then glanced at the file. Her voice softened as she spoke. "Temporary guardianship of Emily is granted to Mr. David Keller. The arrangement will be monitored, but the child will remain in his care for the duration of the review period." It wasn't the end, but it was enough to begin. Emily looked at David, and for the first time she smiled. Wordlessly, because they both knew the truth now. They belonged to each other. Weeks passed. The official process continued, but something in the house had shifted. Emily began leaving her drawings on the table. She stopped checking the doors 3 times. She started falling asleep on her own. David began waking up earlier to make breakfast. He canceled late meetings to make it home for story time. Not just for Emily, but for himself. And then, one morning, the phone call came. The court had granted full custody. Emily wasn't just his in his heart now. She was his on paper, too. A few weeks later, David did something he had thought about for years, but never understood why. He bought an old-school building, run down, forgotten, but to him, full of potential. He named it Emily House, a center for homeless children, neglected souls, and quiet little hearts who had gone unseen. Inside, art rooms, reading corners, safe places to play, warm meals, and most importantly, compassion. Emily watched as the walls were painted. She placed the first books on the shelves. She picked the first colors. She gave the first tour to the first kids. And then, standing in front of a small group of children, she said, "I used to be nobody, but now I'm somebody somewhere. And you can be, too." That evening, David and Emily sat on the steps of the center, sharing ice cream. The sun was setting, the sky painted in lavender and gold. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think we made something beautiful," she said. David looked down at her, smiled softly. "No," he whispered. "We made each other." And that moment etched itself into their hearts forever. Because this wasn't just a story about rescue. This was a story of rebirth, of two silent souls who became a family, of light breaking into darkness, and above all, a story that reminds us what home truly means. And if this story touched something deep inside you, if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever wished for just one person to say, "I see you, you matter," then let this be a reminder. Home isn't walls or windows. It's the feeling of finally being chosen, of finally choosing someone back. Share this video with someone who needs hope. Like it if you believe every child deserves to be seen. And don't forget to subscribe, because here, we tell stories that heal, stories that matter. We don't just talk about fiction, we talk about becoming family.